Okay. Dear colleagues, so it's 1 p.m. I guess we can start. And very good afternoon to all of you. Many thanks for connecting to the webinar today. My name is Nigina Abbaszadeh. I'm Regional Advisor with UNFP Regional Office for Eastern Europe and Central Asia. And I will facilitate today's webinar on behalf of the Issue-Based Coalition on Gender Equality and Empowerment of Women, which is the regional issue-based coalition consisting of 13 UN agencies, regional offices of UN agencies. Today we are launching the SDGs and Gender Equality UN Interagency Guidance Note. Which was developed by the coalition, which I said now, and we hope that this guidance note will help you on integrating gender equality and empowerment of women and girls approach in nationalization and localization of SDGs on the country level and on the region level. And we promoting through this guidance notes gender as an accelerator for the implementation of 2030 agenda. The essence of the guidance note is based on the twin track approach principle, and we highlight in it the importance of leave no one behind as the basis for applying gender lenses to all policies and activities at the national local levels. So overall, we will have 3 webinars to support the rollout of the guidance note. And in today's webinar, we will have an overview of the key messages, structure, and applicability of the guidance note. We will also offer you some user tips. The webinar will cover 4 steps of the SDGs implementation as described in the guidance note, and highlight the examples how gender can accelerate SDGs. We will also hear from the country stories from colleagues from Georgia and Turkmenistan, and who will share with us the experience how they applied gender perspective in SDGs process, in SDG implementation process. Having said that, I would like to thank UN country teams, gender team groups, and UNDAF results group who were part of that process in development of this guidance note. This document, this guidance note is based on your reflections and based on the experience that you shared with us. So we highly appreciate your inputs, and we try to integrate them as much as possible. So now I would like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Aysel Wazirova, who will connect to us from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Aysel, to connect to connect to us at 5 a.m. in the morning. We appreciate your commitment. And so Dr. Aysel Wazirova is a researcher and consultant writer. We worked with Aysel to develop this guidance note. She is well-known expert in ICA region, but also in MENA region, in Middle East region, and she worked a lot in the field of gender and development, having particular expertise in gender mainstreaming and gender analysis, as well as gender-based violence prevention and response, and empowerment rural women and girls. So this is all introduction from my side. We see now 23 participants connected. We will have the chat open, so if you have any questions, feel free to communicate them through chat. I will monitor the chat, and then after Aysel will make her presentation, we will have, as I said, interventions from 2 country offices, from two countries, sorry. And then after that, we will open a webinar for question and answers, right? So overall, we have 1 hour and a half. So I think that would be quite enough to address all your questions and requests as well. So now floor is yours, Aysel. We will project you first to greet participants, and then after a few minutes, we will project the presentation, which will monitor move from here.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me well? Can you hear me?
Yes, it's fine. Yes.
That's good. That's good. I would like to thank everyone who found time to be here with us today. I believe that Guidance Note is a very timely document. It is a fruit of hard labor, and it is definitely a joint effort where we try to incorporate as many voices as possible. Our idea was to, since the document is there to serve country teams, gender theme groups, we wanted it to be as the preparation to be as interactive as possible. So some of you may actually see lessons and tips that you so generously shared with us reflected in the body of the guidance note. Just thank you very much for being with us today, and I'm ready to move to our presentation.
Give us a second.
Okay.
Do you see it yourself, Aysel?
I see it. It's downloading. Okay. Am I monitoring it, or are you progressing through?
No, we're gonna do that as we discussed yesterday.
Excellent. Yeah. So one technical question. Do you see all the
know when the slide?
Well.
Yeah.
You can see everything well? Okay. 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 So to set the context a little bit, we are in the second year, as you all know, of a global SDG implementation process. Obviously the process is basically venturing into uncharted territory, uncharted terrain, and one thing that we definitely wanted to emphasize in the process of preparation is that we realize how diverse our region is, that we also realize how unique our region is, and that we want to embrace many different approaches and reflect different experiences that countries have while they incorporate gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls into SDG implementation. At the moment, as you know, the reporting process in SDG for SDGs is voluntary. So countries present voluntary national reviews. At the moment, to this day, 22 countries presented national reports on the progress and challenges that they face. And those cover 2006, 2007, 2016, 2017. It is a good sign that many countries, including many countries from our region that already presented their national reviews, stressed that gender equality is prerequisite for the sustainable development. So this understanding, this appreciation is there. As I said, we observe at the moment a diversity of approaches to how SDGs are implemented in general, and specifically how gender equality is incorporated into this process. And we see mapping, we see alignment with national strategies, we see how different types of institutional mechanisms are being built. Then some parts of this institutional mechanism stay, and some clearly are not working that well. We see some countries with wide national consultations, including the ones that cover gender equality, and then some countries that do not do national consultations, that are focused on expert-driven process or the government-driven process, which in every country, obviously, the governments are the leading force. So if we could move to the next slide. I have a chart that shows our region, specifically Eastern Europe and Central Asia, and we see that majority of countries have not presented their voluntary national reviews yet, which is absolutely natural. We are in the beginning of the process. 28% has already done this. And if you look at these national reviews, if you go through them, you will see that there is really a different level of depth, and there are different challenges that countries face. So the situation called for a document that will provide user-friendly guidance on integrating gender equality, because everyone is in this uncharted territory, and we wanted to provide some tips and guidance, but also incorporate different experiences that are out there, and facilitate the experience sharing process. We were also hearing from country teams how important it is for them to know what the others are doing, and there's not always enough time and room to exchange views. So we thought that this will be the beginning step in the wider process of accumulating, analyzing experience that is regional. So as I said, the purpose of the guidance note is to deliver, no, can we go back? Haven't finished with this one yet. To deliver a user-friendly guidance on integrating gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls in the nationalization and localization of SDGs. We realize that in most countries, we are still in the nationalization process, that the priority is given to establishing national vision, but also we know that some countries of the region have already started on localization efforts. As an audience, we intended United Nations country teams, gender theme groups, but we also thought that this is a kind of guidance note, a document that can be shared with partners. And when I say partners, I of course mean the governments, civil society organizations, local experts, regional experts, other international organizations working in the region. So a fairly wide audience that this can be shared with, but our target group, of course, are United Nations country teams. It's, as Nigina said, the guidance note was produced by United Nations Europe and Central Asia Issue-Based Coalition on Gender and the Empowerment of Women and Girls. Now we can move. Thank you. And I would like to go through the objectives. We were aiming to highlight the central position of gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls in SDG as an integrated policy network. It's a new format that we are dealing with after Millennium Development Goals, and we wanted to make sure that the guidance note allocates enough time talking about the characteristics of this network of sustainable development goals and the role of gender equality in it. So we, of course, focused on the twin track approach, which is a new way of incorporating gender lens into development. But also we wanted to look at how leaving no one behind principle can be used for advancing gender equality in the region. We'll talk about it later in the presentation. We wanted to suggest ways of incorporating gender equality and SDG in SDG implementation step by step, so be quite practical about it. And you will see that while the first section is more theoretical, the third section is quite practical and goes step by step through 4 steps of implementation process, and then goes into more details for each process, for each step, and I will talk about it. So we could move. We also wanted to analyze SDG implementation. No, we need to go back. Yeah, well, like that. That's good. We wanted to analyze the SDG implementation in the context of regional trends. We wanted to contextualize this process because obviously when you read about global trends, about global efforts, the first thing that you hear when you talk to different country representatives is about, okay, how does that apply to my challenges here, to the country's unique historical context. And we wanted to look at what is going on in the region, what kind of trends are there that are significant for gender equality, and then how these trends can be addressed. If they're negative, how can they be addressed through this coherent policy network that is SDGs. We have a special part of the guidance note dedicated to discussing it. And then, last but not least, we wanted to build bridges between the rapidly growing body of global knowledge on SDG implementation and country-based experiences. And here, I'd like to say that when we, even at this stage, early stage of the process, when we were developing the guidance note, I was actually surprised to see how many sources are out there already. And then when I was looking at it through the 2016 through 2017, it is an ever-growing universe of text, which sometimes can be really overwhelming. So one of the things that we wanted to do is kind of create for the reader a very brief description of the main stages that are out there, main lines of thought that are out there, and also in our section dedicated to resources to give you the resources that we consider to be most effective and ready to use, user-friendly. So if we could move one slide more. So a couple of words about data collection and preparation of the note. It was indeed a very interactive process. It was our intention to draw on national experiences. With sources, we collected data from the desk review of global, regional, and national reports. We looked into databases and assessments. Overall, I put this 100 here, but in reality, when I think about it, I think it was even more, because I remember as we were working on it, the documents kept arriving and arriving and arriving, and it's really hard to process this body of knowledge. So once again, we were thinking about the guidance note as some kind of a map that also allows you to navigate this fairly vast body of text. Another source that was very important for us was the survey. We developed a questionnaire and we placed it online, and 17 country teams of the region were very helpful in responding to the online survey, which we did in August, September of 2016, and then we updated it in March to make sure that we are not missing some important, interesting, and useful developments that are happening in different countries. So the teams shared, if we could go to the next slide, they shared, we specifically asked, and they generously shared with us lessons learned and promising practices. They gave us tips. They share challenges that they're facing. You will find that many of those are there in the guidance note. Easy to be used, probably creatively. We also made sure that with the draft of the guidance note, we shared it with various UN agencies and representatives that are members of the issue-based groups, and even wider than that. We got many very interesting, insightful responses that were incorporated in the text. So overall, once again, this is by no means a monological text. It's very polyphonic. It has many voices in it, which I think should make it more efficient as a tool. So that is. So this is a slide that gives you a general idea of the structure of the guidance note. Can you see the fonts?
Yes, that's okay. Yes,
Good.
please.
Good. So as you see, it has an introduction. It has 3 sections, which first looks into the 2030 agenda and network of SDGs and the role of gender equality in the network. Section 2 is contextualizing it within regional trends, and it is linked to an addendum that looks into 9 regional trends, important, significant for gender equality. These trends were developed, identified, and analyzed during the preparation for the advocacy issue brief. that we have inside this guidance note. And then section 3 is dedicated to gender responsive SDG implementation and goes step by step through different stages of it. A very important part of the guidance note are addenda. We have 5 of those, and you will find separately one dedicated to resources, one dedicated to different exercises that UN teams and partners can undertake in order to determine at every step the best course of action. And as I said, lessons from UNCTs, and also we tried to chart some routes that countries are taking in SDG implementation and incorporating gender equality. So you will see basically in a graphic form of how different are the approaches of different countries to incorporation of gender equality in nationalization and localization. And the last section is a glossary. So if we go more, we move into sections. So I will give a brief overview of each section to give you a general idea of what are the themes, key messages highlighted in each section, which by no means can, of course, exhaust everything that is covered by the guidance note, just a brief overview. So we looked into the characteristics, as I said, of a Sustainable Development Goals network, how it's a new quality of vision, how it's an integrated and holistic approach to development, the differences between the approach to gender equality in SDGs and Millennium Development Goals. We looked into new way of incorporating gender equality. We look into twin track approach by highlighting SDG 5. That is a standalone goal, as you all know, dedicated specifically to gender equality. We go through its 9 targets, like thematically group them. And then we also look at the other part of the twin track approach, which is incorporating mainstreaming gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls as a cross-cutting theme. And its intention of breaking down silos, because that's what it does. It addresses a very serious issue that was there inherent in the Millennium Development Goals that were very silo-like in their approach. So what we will see is, what we try to show is how through gender-related targets in different Sustainable Development Goals other than SDG 5, the idea of gender as an accelerator, gender as condition for reaching the goal, or gender as an accelerator that helps reaching the goal, is actually rooted in the whole system, in the vision of SDGs. We have an example that shows it in the guidance note. Gender equality is as a hidden driver behind the economic and social inequality is another topic that we touch upon, and it's specifically important for our region, where gender inequality is indeed generating, as we know, generating was well documented, the inequality of wealth and inequality of income. In many situations where vertical segregation and horizontal segregation in the labor market is one of the drivers of inequality, where women's unpaid labor is one of the drivers of bringing this reproduction of poverty. So we look into that, and we specifically look into how leaving no one behind principle applies to advancing towards gender equality, because it's a new, again, something new that SDG agenda that's generally very, very focused on inequality, as you all probably know. But it highlights leaving no one behind principle, highlights other dimension of inequality, the inequality that hides behind national averages, the inequality of exclusion and vulnerability. So we specifically in the guidance note try to highlight the gender dimension of exclusion and vulnerability. We look into how, if we use intersectionality as an idea, how different ways of excluding, how different levels of discrimination pile up, and gender inequality is one of the basic foundational layers in this pyramid of discrimination, how they pile up to produce these groups that are specifically vulnerable, that are left outside of mainstream development process. So that is also the theme that is highlighted there in the guidance note. This is a very good chart that I personally use a lot. It was developed by the Kumu Vision visualization platform, and it's based on David LeBlanc's analysis of SDGs as a network, which, from what I know, was one of the very first attempts to analyze SDGs using network studies, social network studies. So I wanted us to look at this because it gives us a bird's view of the SDG network. But if you notice, it also tells us quite a bit about the position of gender equality of SDG 5 specifically, of a standalone goal within the network. If you notice, some icons are bigger and some are smaller. Well, the reason is because they're weighted, and the icons, the goals, SDGs that have more connections, that penetrate more into a general network, are bigger. So you see how 12, responsible consumption and production, 10 and 8, right, inequality and economic growth and decent jobs, are big, well connected, and so is the SDG 1. SDG 5 is smaller, it's less connected, but it's not one of the isolated ones, which is good. And it also shows us in terms of, you see the edges, the lines that connect networks, and the little numbers on them, through how many targets are SDGs connected. So we can see that the connection with SDG 4, the education, is pretty strong. However, interestingly, the connection with SDG 12 is not that strong. The reason we're looking at it, I wanted to stress that we try to show, and we have it in the exercises, how important it is to look at SDGs as a network, and even on a national level or local level, create these networks that show us the priorities, and then understand what can we do to connect SDG 5 to more connected, more prominent SDGs. Better connected SDGs, because that's an important entry point for advancing gender equality. And also how to stress and emphasize the importance of gender-related targets within this well-connected SDGs that are more likely to get attention and resources. This is a strategy that we wanted to highlight. If we could move to the next slide, please. As Nigina mentioned already, gender equality as an accelerator was one of the topics that we tried to focus on quite a bit, because as far as we understand, that's one of the ideas that is it requires a lot of explanation. In reality, accelerator role is introduced within the body of SDG targets. It's introduced through the targets, explicitly connecting sustainable development with gender equality. And this is a very strong advantage of SDGs as a network, because they basically have the idea that gender is an accelerator already reflected in these targets, in the text. Our region, for example, just one of the examples that I think demonstrates it quite well. In our region, we have several countries with large rural population and with facing challenges of rural poverty and low volume of agricultural production. We also have countries that have agricultural sector that employs a lot of people, but it's a very low productivity sector and the wages are very low. We have a situation where women are majority among very small food producers, very small farmers, or they are there as a contributing family workers, which they constitute majority among the contributing family workers, very often working without any contract, any protection of their social rights, economic rights. So women farmers, and that was well documented, have limited access to credit, technology, and professional networks compared to men. It was also well documented that women have very weak control of land compared to men. We see that in HDR, we see that in Food and Agriculture Organization's recent report about gender in rural areas, gender equality in rural areas. And again, the specific characteristic of our region is that we have normally no problems in terms of legislations. Legislations give equal rights to men and women to control land, and the land ownership as a rule. But it's when it comes to actual control of land, that is where we see this hidden inequality that basically deprives women from inherited land or from making decisions about land, and that is, once again, limiting their access to resources, to economic resources. And another problem that's typical for our region, we know that in the best case scenario, 2.5 times more unpaid work done by women, well, it's an average, some countries are much more, compared to men. So this burden, again, once again, limits the ability of women to engage into agricultural production that is bringing significant income to the families and making women economically independent. But not only that, it generally slows down economic growth. Advancing gender equality is estimated to increase production by 20-30%. And that is the way to end hunger, to end poverty, to provide decent work. So none of these goals can be achieved without the gender equality and equal access to resources, services, and knowledge. That is this accelerator basically pumping blood into the system in order to make the advancement towards the goal actually happen. And we see that in, if we could move to the next slide, just to see the graphic description of it. As you see in this visual, we have SDG 5 with its targets of access to economic resources and recognizing and valuing unpaid care and domestic work. But we also see this, basically this gender as an accelerator, the understanding of it, the appreciation of it in Target 2.3 in SDG 2 and hunger, where we see that by 2030, the target is to double the agricultural productivity and incomes of small-scale food producers, in particular women, through the access, increasing the equality of access to, as I said, resources, services, and so on. Otherwise, if we don't have this accelerator, the movement towards the goal will be impeded. And then, of course, when we look at poverty, there we have target 1.4 by 2030, ensure that all men and women, in particular the poor and the vulnerable, have equal rights to economic resources. Again, this is the way to end poverty. This is the accelerating role of gender equality if we want to move towards this goal. So this is another chart that shows the regional aspect of it, prepared by UNDP. Gender equality is associated with faster economic growth. And if you look at the chart, I don't know if you can see it well, we see Central Asia and Eastern Europe, they're kind of orangish brownish dots. We see them quite high on economic growth, on the speed of economic growth, but also showing fairly good results in terms of the gender equality. However, we also see how diverse the region is Do you see some of these brown dots somewhere where the actual gender equality is gender inequality is fairly high, and economic growth is subsequently quite slow? So the chart shows us this association that is, of course, we do not claim it's a causal relationship, but it's an important tool to show how these two factors can be connected. Can we move to the next slide? Thank you. And another very good visual developed by UNFPA that I wanted to analyze here, it's basically self-explanatory. You see, it shows SDG 1 and SDG 8, women investing 90% of income back to families, and how it creates multiplier effect. And you also see, and that's the beauty of this chart, you see how through the life cycle, different targets, gender-related targets in various SDGs and SDG 4 and SDG 5, how they bring about this very important movement that we need in order to achieve SDG 1, no poverty, and create decent work and economic growth, which is a goal number 8. So that's also, again, a process that shows us how the SDG vision actually incorporates the idea of gender as an accelerator in a very clear form. Can we move? We also look in the guidance note, and you will see the chart the visual that I've just described. You will see it in the guidance note. Another one that you will see in the guidance note also illustrates the question that we looked into, how the SDG coherent policy framework can effectively address the negative trends that we know are there and are quite topical for our region. So here we see, we take a key trend, which is harmful practices that persist in certain parts of our region. And it can be a child marriage, forced marriage, for example. And then we try to look into what kind of action is needed to reverse the trend. If you look at this, you will see how different sustainable development goals and targets, specific targets, are all interconnected and need to be interconnected, need to be implemented in relation to each other, in very as basically a cluster, in order to reverse the trend. Only achieving or focusing on SDG 5.3, eliminate all harmful practices, is not enough. It needs the input that will be developed under, for example, SDG 4 by 2030, eliminate gender disparities in education, and looks at the equal access to education. It needs to look into how the trafficking and abuse and violence and torture of children play an important role in reproducing again and again these conditions that generate harmful practices. It looks into the sexual and reproductive health services, if those are available, if the ideas of sexual and reproductive rights are being actually embraced within national policies or local policies. And of course, it looks at the poverty and reduction of poverty, because it's another breeding ground that makes actors more dependent and generate the situations of this that include harmful practices. So if we could move. Now that you will see again the visual, the chart, and the description inside the guidance note. So as I said, section 1, and you probably already noticed it, is looking at this general vision, defining the place of gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls within the network. With section 2, we move to regional trends and how they impact gender equality. And we try to contextualize sustainable development agenda within the challenges and unique historical and economic and social context of our region. Having said that, we very much appreciated in the process that our region is fairly diverse. Yes, it's mainly middle-income countries, but the political systems, situations with civil society, situations with different social protection systems, economic situations are fairly diverse. However, there are commonalities, and we try to synthesize those commonalities in these 9 regional trends that you will find in the addendum 2 of the guidance note. If we could move to the next slide, please. So here, this slide is not a part of guidance note. It's, as you probably, many of you recognized, is the part of the Human Development Report. And it just gives a general idea of where the region is in terms of gender inequality index. As you see, the indicators are better than the general situation in the world, but you also see quite a bit of a diversity here. But as many indices, this index just shows us a general picture that, of course, needs to be dissected and analyzed because there are many indicators that are a part of it that, when you look in the country context, tell us very different stories. So if we could move to the next slide. Here you have 9 trends that we written in a brief form, of course. You will find them described and analyzed with numbers in the addendum 2. So we have, and I want to stress specifically that these trends are very much interrelated. We see that, for example, that the region has high labor force participation rate for women. I mean, still lower than for men, but compared to world averages, it's pretty high. However, there are different underlying structural problems that continuously reproduce inequality in the labor market, inequality of wealth and income. We have occupational segregation, vertical and horizontal. We have very much a reliance of unpaid labor of women. We have women, to a larger extent than men, involved in precarious jobs. We have women as a really infinitesimal minority among the managers and CEOs of businesses in the region. So we see all these trends, all this characteristic of the general trend of insufficient economic empowerment of women. In fact, it absolutely matches what we see in the gender gap report, where, if you remember this visual, the part where with economic gap is actually lower compared to, for example, education or reproductive rights. However, the story of the region, and it's an interesting part, it also is mentioned in the Human Development Report, the most recent one, is that the advantages that we have grown so used to, as in high level of education, good legislation protecting reproductive rights, those are actually slowly eroding, and it's a very, very troubling situation. And we see it if we look at the retraditionalization, the wave of conservative, very ultra-conservative movements in the region that very much uses the legitimization of patriarchy as one of the foundations of its claim to power, that glorifies the tradition that ties women to a private sphere as the main part of this nativity discourses that they use. We also look into how austerity measures that were implemented during economic crisis had very clear gender impact, because the reliance on unpaid labor provided by women the reliance by not just families or communities, by states, is a very important factor that limits women's ability to access opportunities and resources outside of home. We look into the main load of unpaid work and care, the double burden. We look at the barriers that are persisting in accessing justice, especially for vulnerable groups. And another aspect of it is that civic space for civil society organizations in many parts of the region is shrinking. And that has its effect on so many levels, because historically in our region, women were very important driving force in civil society. Now that this space is shrinking, that means the public space is shrinking for women to be a part of discussions, to be a part of decision making. So in my opinion, it's a very interesting part of the guidance note, and it contextualizes and it has recommendations on how these regional trends can be addressed through SDG implementation, which I think is important at this stage. So moving to section 3, this section again is, as I said, is very practical. It looks at how we incorporate gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls into SDGs. Gives general description of a MAP strategy, and the steps that we suggest have very good correlation with mainstreaming, acceleration, and policy support parts of MAP strategy. It obviously always intends joint work by UN country teams, gender theme groups, and national partners. So we go step by step, looking through different ways of integrating gender equality into the process. You will again, as I said, hear multiple voices specifically in this part of the guidance note, because you will see that our text goes, and then you will see in boxes tips from different countries of the region, country examples, lessons learned. They are right there inside the text, so you will hear this many voices giving different advice, stemming from different contexts, which I think is very important. To cover 4 steps of implementation that you will see in the guidance note, there is a step 1 that looks into nationalization and localization of gender-related SDGs and targets. So that is basically describing the stage where national vision is being developed and what needs to be done for this national vision to incorporate appropriately gender equality. And I know that many countries are past this stage, but the thing is, this vision development is an ongoing process. There are changes that are being made, and we need to be very vigilant in order to continue keeping the focus on gender equality within national vision for nationalization and localization. Step 2 looks into institutional mechanisms for SDG implementation, how those are, in many countries, those are being established, how different they are, what needs to be done in order to participate in the process, bring in and explain the importance of gender-related targets and SDG 5 for the to be constantly in attention of this institutional mechanism, how make sure that local experts are made a part of this institutional mechanisms that are there, how to deal, for example, with parts of the mechanism that are normally do not deal with gender equality at all. Let's say if you have the Ministry of Energy that is there and has their own task force in charge of SDG implementation, what needs to be done to sensitize them to the importance of and to the links between gender equality and access to energy, which are there, we know it. Just take women farmers and their access to community-based energy sources. So then we look into step 3, setting up, excuse me, monitoring and reporting frameworks, ensuring the accountability through reporting, of course, how to make sure that at this very early stages, when the formats, even when the evaluation frameworks are developed, how to make sure that gender equality is incorporated, that twin track approach is reflected in these tools, in these frameworks. And then the fourth step is gender responsive evaluation of progress towards SDGs, and we look at different challenges, impediments in evaluating how certain aspects can be missed, how to make sure that it has strong gender lens. Oh, could we now move to the next slide, please? Going even deeper into the structure of the guidance note, with each step, you will have that particular structure. You will see the purpose, right? Why it's important to incorporate gender equality at this particular step. You will see where to start subsection, that talks about getting prepared, mobilizing resources. You will see important actions, what kind of steps, sub-steps, actions can be taken to ensure maximum effect, what kind of tools can be used. And then we also have a subsection dedicated to what to watch for. What are the risks? What are impediments? What are limitations? And what to do about those. If we could move to the next one. And here are just two examples, basically quotes from the guidance note. The first one shows you what we have part of what we have under the purpose subsection for the fourth step for evaluation. Gender responsive evaluation enables an analysis of the impact of SDG implementation, highlights the different aspects of exclusion, measures the pace of progress towards gender-related targets and goals, looks into bottlenecks, draws lessons from challenges and achievements. So this is what you have under the purpose, but then it goes further and becomes more practical. And then just as an example of what to watch for, there is gender responsive evaluation should not be cast as a sole responsibility of the national machinery on gender equality. This will isolate and marginalize evaluation outcomes and undermine efforts to mainstream gender equality into the fabric of national SDG implementation. I would add to that, looking back into regional characteristics and trends, national machineries in the region are normally underfunded. They don't have enough resources and they don't have enough people. So once again, that's like a caution to not try to make sure that it's not limited to national machinery. And the next slide is showing you, if we could go to each of those, just for you to see the fonts a little bigger. You have resources, so you have an addendum that's solely dedicated to resources. They are thematically grouped. Again, helps, as I say, to navigate this huge universe of text that is being produced right now. You have a special special addendum dedicated to tips, promising practices, and lessons. And these are, again, all taken from national experiences. You have exercises, as I said, that's also in addenda. And you have country examples, which are quite extensive. You also have, last but not least, you have how countries are implementing SDGs. I already mentioned it. It gives you roots, basically what different countries did step by steps. Just an example of a tip that was generously provided by our colleagues from Georgia. It's essential to harmonize the technical inputs provided by UN agencies and possibly by other development partners in the frameworks of the Gender Think Group. It talks about how it's important to develop one voice prior to sharing with the government to ensure that inputs related to the localization of the SDG targets, including the selection, for example, of relevant global SDG indicators and their customization, that they are all coherent and of a high quality. So need to develop one voice before talking to the government about these crucial topics. Speaking of indicators, of course, we do have the discussion of indicators, different tiers of indicators. You will find it all in the section 3 of the guidance note. So with that, my overview of the guidance note is complete. I would like to invite our colleagues to share their experience. And once again, I wanted to thank you so much. You both are traveling and you found time, despite your tiredness, despite your travel, to come and share your experiences with us. Thank you so much. Maybe, Nigina, would you like to invite?
Yes, should we start? Who would like to start first, Dovran or our colleague from Georgia?
Hi, Nagina. I can start. This
Yes,
is Dovran from
please.
Turkmenistan. Yeah. So for this webinar, for the purpose of this webinar, my country, Turkmenistan, was, invited as the country with a complex context in terms of, SDGs adaptation, implementation, and monitoring. But at the same time, we are proud to share with you all the positive achievements that we had over the last 2 years with regard to SDGs. And I'm really proud and happy for this opportunity to briefly share with you the experience of university in Turkmenistan regarding nationalization and integration of SDGs, including the one on gender equality. So just briefly about the achievements in the area of SDGs. The government of Turkmenistan formally adopted a list of all 17 Sustainable Development Goals, 148 targets, and 187 indicators, and committed itself to implement them over the next 15 years. And just recently, the government of Turkmenistan has established an SDG coordination body, which consists of 47 government ministries and agencies represented by the deputy ministers and or co-chairs. The government has also appointed the Minister of Finance and Economy for the overall responsibility for coordination of progress on the SDGs. And currently, the whole work around SDGs in Turkmenistan are centered around the following 4 principles. The first one is about leaving no one behind, with focus on vulnerable groups of population, including women and girls. Second, social development for all and improved service delivery in key areas such as health and education and so forth. The third principle, mitigation of climatic risks and improved resilience in rural and urban areas. And the fourth one is about effective state and local governance. And now I will jump into the section about practical tips, how we could get to these, achievements, let's say. So the key message to the colleagues in the region is that you need to, from the onset of the process of nationalization of SDGs, you need to make sure that government is the key owner of the SDGs in the country. From the MDGs experience, we remember that in most of the cases, MDGs were presented and assumed as the global UN agenda for development, and there was little room for understanding that it was actually a government agenda for development. So this time when we started the work with the SDGs, the key message to the government was that it is a government development agenda for the next 15 years within the global, trend of SDGs. So that was a key message. And because of that, we were promoting this message. We secured a strong national ownership in Turkmenistan. The SDGs were clustered, and we had a separate, cluster group for the SDG 5, gender equality, and those groups were actually they are still exist, and they consist of national representatives and UN agencies, and those groups still work. So we started with the adaptation of SDGs. Then we move it to the stage of integrating the nationalized SDGs into the existing development plans. And now we are at the stage of, developing of a robust monitoring system to measure progress towards SDGs implementation. So those groups played a key role in moving ahead the whole topic of SDGs within the national development agenda. And the second tip, how to make sure that gender equality is there, is to talk about gender equality as much as possible. So every meeting, technical meeting, official meeting, negotiations, advocacy events, we always use those, kind of entry points to talk about the importance of gender equality as a topic per se, as a standalone SDG, but at the same time as an important accelerator to achieving other SDGs. So we developed strong messages on that, and we use it all the meetings. We devoted the special sessions to talk about, the importance of gender equality. We didn't assume that the people in the room were all aware about, gender equality concept, because it's not true actually. You always have new people. You do have people who are in the process, who know the key principles and concept of gender equality. But there are always people who do not know, or with limited knowledge about the gender equality. So we always went to the meetings with an assumption that the audience has limited knowledge about gender equality, and we were reflecting. We were always refreshing their knowledge about gender equality principles and concept itself, and that helped very much. So at the end of the meeting, I had some people approaching me and saying, "You see, it was really good that you told about the importance of gender equality. Now I understand better why we are here and why we are talking about gender equality and SDGs." So that's the second tip I wanted to share with my colleagues in the region. There are some others, but considering the time limit I have, I think I have to stop here. But we are in Turkmenistan open for questions, for further work with the colleagues in the region, and sharing our experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dovran. Thank you very much. So for sharing this experience. So now we will pass floor to Irina, I understand, from Georgia.
Thank you, Regina, and thank you, Aysel, for having me at the discussion and for providing us with a platform to share our experience. We're very happy about it with our colleagues from the region. So as Aysel has mentioned in the beginning, Georgia is one of the 22 countries who has already made some significant progress in terms of the localization of the SDGs. Initially, Georgia had prioritized 14 goals out of the 17 and 88 global targets. That was back in 2015. And the government has also presented the first voluntary report on the progress towards achieving localized SDGs during the high-level political forum in New York in 2016. However, very important targets, such as, for example, 5.4 and 5.5 relating to unpaid care and domestic work, and women's participation in political, economic, and public life were missing at that point. So we believe that the main achievements or lessons learned that we would like to share with our colleagues in keeping gender equality related goals and targets central to the localization and nationalization process include a presence of a strong gender theme group in the country that unites not only UN agencies, but also a broad spectrum of other development partners working in the field. I think that this has given us a very strong voice for advocacy to advocate for the inclusion of all relevant targets in the SDG nationalization process. So as a concrete example, as I said, two very important targets were missing at the initial stage from the nationalized SDG matrix. So UN Women, supported by UNDP and by the Gender Theme Group at large, has developed an advocacy paper on the inclusion of these additional targets and indicators in the nationalized matrix. We will be happy to share with you this advocacy paper if you wish. And so as a result of this advocacy paper and other advocacy efforts in this regard, these two targets were indeed included in the SDG matrix. Currently, all 17 goals, Georgia has nationalized, or all 17 goals. So furthermore, it should be highlighted that UN Women and UNCT, in particular the resident coordinator and the country representative, have been very vocal about this on every platform available, every forum, every bilateral and multilateral meeting. Also, I think it's worth mentioning that one of the things that has positioned us strategically in this process is our long-standing partnership with the government administration, inter alia, in providing technical support to the government in developing gender thematic policies. Another important aspect, I think, is that, as you know, lack of gender equality related data can be a significant challenge also in terms of nationalizing targets and indicators. So a very important advantage that we had, in our opinion, is that is the Violence Against Women survey that we are currently implementing, and which will generate baseline data for all violence-related indicators under SDG 5 and SDG 16. We are implementing this survey together with the National Statistics Office of Georgia, Geostat, and the prospective availability of this data from the survey, it helped us a lot in advocating for the inclusion of specific targets and indicators that wouldn't have been there otherwise. And in this process, we're also building capacities of Geostat so that they are able to repeat the survey every 5 to 7 years as the government decides, independently from us, to track progress towards achievement of the relevant targets. So as I mentioned, we are providing technical support to the government in the development of gender thematic policies, in particular the gender equality chapter of the National Human Rights Action Plan, the Ending Violence Against Women National Action Plan, and the 1325 Action Plan. So we have made additional effort to make sure that the SDG targets are integrated on the impact or outcome level in these policy papers as relevant. So we are currently in this process. And to summarize, basically, as lessons learned and recommendations for our colleagues in the region, we think that mobilization of stakeholders at the outset is very important to have a strong voice for advocacy. And joint advocacy initiatives, advocacy papers, using all opportunities with relevant actors are also very important to generate support, and high-level UN support, of course, by the resident coordinator and the UN Women country representative can be critical. And in addition, we think that showing added value and expertise that we as UN can bring to the table and to the process are also very important. Apart from data that and the survey that I have mentioned earlier, UN Women's document, guidance document entitled Suggested Indicators for Monitoring Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment in the SDG Framework, has been a very useful resource, for example, in our case, in guiding us in the development of the indicators. So basically, just to highlight once again that through technical support, integrating SDGs in the national policy framework is essential to make sure that the policies are directed to the achievement of the same goals and that there is alignment. Yeah. So thank you. That's basically it, what I wanted to say, and I will be happy to take questions if any.
Thank you very much, Irina. Thanks a lot for sharing your experience, and overall to Dovran and to you for highlighting on the need for mobilization of stakeholders, ownership from the government side, and UN added value in terms of providing technical expertise. Aysel, if you would like to have any short intervention afterwards, or we just open floor to question and answers. You're welcome to say if you would like to say short summary. Can you please unmute yourself first?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yes, just a brief summary. What I have observed, what I noticed, and I would like to thank both of our guest speakers. It's the importance of working with the governments, definitely, and also the importance of connecting, of building this coherent action that goes from advocacy to capacity building, and then to interventions through policies at the policy development level. This seems to be a link that is very important, as well as, of course, mobilizing different actors in speaking in one voice on the key messages. So I thought that this was very clearly a similarity between two, otherwise different accounts and different contexts that we had a privilege to hear.
Okay, thank you very much, Aysel. So we are now opening the floor for questions and answers, and please, if anyone is willing to ask or communicate, share your own experience from your own country, the floor is open now.
Hello, can I join the discussion?
Yes,
My name,
yes,
my name is Galina. I am from Ukraine. I am a focal point on SDGs in Kiev. I would like, first of all, to thank Aysel and her colleagues for preparing these guidelines and these like tips and recommendations. And I like it very much because of this clear picture of the trends. They are really very mutual for all the region. And I also would like to thank our colleagues from Georgia and Turkmenistan, and maybe very shortly some continuous tips to continue the conversation. Our experience also of SDG localization was also very successful, and I would like to say then, when in addition to our colleagues from Georgia and Turkmenistan, that we, when we provided this technical support for the government, it was also very important to explain, not only to explain why it's important to pay attention to gender equality, but also how to mainstream gender, especially to other SDGs, not only SDG 5. Because SDG 5 was mainly why. But when we were speaking about other goals, health, education, poverty, communities development, for example, especially economic development, it was not clear why and how to mainstream gender to these targets and indicators of these other goals. And I think that their UN Women expertise is very important to show how it could be done in other SDGs. As of the partnership and very strong advocacy voice, I think it's very important. Not government and sure should play a very leading role in ownership the process, but civil society organizations and also women's group should also be joined to this process of localization, nationalization, and localization. And I think it's very important not only to join them to this process, and we join them on for national and local level consultations, but also, as we did, we prepared a short step-by-step guideline leaflet for our women's groups and women's civil society organization, how to advocate gender equality, what SDGs are, what are the main value of gender equality SDG, how to mainstream gender to other SDGs, and how to advocate for that. And I think it's also very important to strengthen the advocacy voice on gender equality during the nationalization process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Galina. Appreciate your experience. If any other country would like to share yours or have any questions to Aysel or to me, okay, we have one question through the chat. Dear Aysel, please can you clear what is the difference between nationalization and localization? Because in Russian, nationalization has other meaning.
Yeah. Nationalization refers to the process of developing national vision for SDGs, defining priorities, and then implementing on national level through nation scale mechanisms, the ones that will be applied everywhere across the country, while localization reflects the efforts of local governments, of local actors, stakeholders to implement SDGs within local communities. And the difference there in Russian, I don't know how do they translate it, nationalizация, localizация. The difference is there because some local challenges can be different from the national ones. Some local priorities can be different from the national ones, right? Some local communities may, because the resources are also, of course, limited, they may want to say, well, we want to prioritize these 2 goals and these 3 targets within each goal and this list of indicators. This is what we can do feasibly, and that's why it's important also in terms of ownership of local actors, because when it's on national level, there always is a risk that there will be places and actors and groups that are left behind. However, when you bring it to the local level of local communities, there are more chances that the issues that otherwise will be marginalized will become more visible and will be addressed. And that's why there is this difference between nationalization and localization. I don't know if I was able to answer the question.
Yeah, I think it's clear. You clearly explained that. And we have one more comment here, like the proposal for translation, I understand. So you can apply in Russian локализация на национальном и местном уровнях. So
да, можно локализация на национальном местном уровне. Да, я думаю, что это хороший перевод. Или имплементация. Я бы сделала имплементация на национальном и местном уровне.
Okay, maybe can you say it in English? The same?
Yeah, I can do. I mean, we can talk about implementation, right? Implementation on national and local level, but also we can talk about developing national and local priorities.
Yes.
For SDG.
Okay, any more questions, dear colleagues, or any more examples?
Maybe Galina has
Yeah, thank you, Aysel. I wanted to add about this localization. Last year, we had local consultations in Ukraine, and you know that Ukraine is a very big country, and our 10, even more, 11 consultations on local level showed that local communities, local authorities, local civil society organizations, they identified completely different priorities for their region development. National priorities, and then were completely different. And when we came to our, for example, rural regions. Then there are very industrial regions. Then we have a Carpathian region with very many forests, and then we have South region with sea and all other priorities. That's why it's very important to understand that's really a local level of consultation will be very important to look at different needs of different groups of people. Some of our regions are more young in our country, some are more, for example, aging population. Some regions have more completely different national minorities, like, for example, Roma in the western part of the country. That's why it's very important to come to the local level. Thank you.
Excellent example. Thank you so much, Galina. So any more reflections from the audience, from the colleagues, please? Lucretia, I see. Yeah.
Yes. Hello, everyone.
Pronounced correctly?
Lucretia, yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this informative webinar. Indeed, it's very helpful in order to understand guidelines. Yeah, thank you.
It's difficult to understand.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Excellent.
Yeah, this is kind of
Hello?
better.
Okay,
Please.
because microphone was. Okay, thank you very much, first of all, for this very useful presentation. So, I was maybe lost your tips from the last PowerPoint presentation when you were talking about one voice before talking to the government. Do you mean one voice between whom? UN agencies or all development partners at the country level? What was your idea? Because I want to continue on this.
Absolutely. The
yeah.
tip was provided by our Georgian colleagues, and they felt that they were talking about the UN country teams. Team. They felt that it brings more power to the message when you build a coherent message through internal discussions first, and then you bring this ready, coherent message with one voice from the UN country team. And maybe if you have partners and you can negotiate again a coherent proposal, then that is, it has more effect.
Yeah. So this, the last mentions, is very important for us because indeed here at the country level, we are feeling that we need to be with us all development partners, like World Bank, like EU, the European Union, because they are very big supporter for development. And just today we had a discussion internally here in our office, but it's relevant because the national government now is at the stage of elaboration of a National Development Strategy 2030. And a very interesting indicator appear here. There, Gender Inequality Index, which you also show in your slides, which I found very useful. Meanwhile, the European Union is using another indicator, Gender Equality Index, which covers 7 areas. So what and how the government now, who is taking the decision what indicator to be measured as this national development strategy, because you can understand that the policy have to be different in this case. Do you have any tips on this?
Can help us. Well, I think you look into components of each index and you look into which better reflects what you are trying to capture in terms of your national priorities. And one example that I like to bring, and I'm not saying that it applies to everyone, for example, we have a component that in Gender Inequality Index that relates to women's seats in parliament.
Yeah.
Not in every country, the parliament is the main seat of power. So when we're trying to measure how women's access to real decision making, in my opinion, not in every country, parliament is the best place to look at. So I would say what maybe the good course of action is to look into the components of the indicator and see which components better reflect local or national realities? Which would serve better to capturing what you want to capture?
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Very useful. And I already thinking about the future guidelines which could be appear, because we are a little bit advanced, as you know. We also passed this exercise of nationalization, mapping of the existing national development strategic documents, and we're already accounting to what extent and what available information are under the indicators, even though. So the next maybe guidance and support from regions will be very useful on the level of monitoring. All these gender sensitive indicators, which was nationalized, half of them, or sometimes more than half of them, are still missing at the country level. So I don't know if Nigina can answer to this question. Will be some regional, some development on this direction? Thank you.
Sorry, I missed a part of your question. Can you please repeat?
Yes, further guidance on the monitoring of SDG gender sensitive indicators at the country level after this nationalization and mainstreaming within the strategic documents. Will be some development on this?
On the monitoring,
Yeah.
I mean, as you know, each country is selective in terms of their own indicators, and there is also the regional. There is a sort of having the regional mechanism for monitoring of the SDGs, which will be under oversight of the UNEC. And this is not clear how it will be function and what is the overall the regional framework in that respect. But if we talk about the gender specific dimension of the indicators, the issue-based coalition will be able to help all the gender team groups and the UN country teams in terms of the mainstream gender into the indicators. But once again, I would like to highlight the national indicators. The indicators are selected by countries, and they will be, let's say, contextualize them, and they will develop them based on their according to the tiers and also according to their priorities and the data they can report as well.
I may add something.
Yes, I shall. Please.
Yeah, with the guidance note, we also, I think, have quite a valuable little section there that talks about methods of evaluation, because when we say evaluation, very often what we mean is the one done by quantitative, and so many of these indicators are developed for quantitative studies, quantitative evaluation, but we also stressed in the guidance note the importance of qualitative indicators that help us to measure how the attitudes change, how the stereotypes are changing or fading away. So I would very much like to stress the importance of looking into these difficult to capture parts of change.
Yeah, and qualitative indicators usually say about those most vulnerable and marginalized because they are not captured by the national indicators.
Yeah, big numbers.
And they look to the like quality of services, access, and all this components, elements. My colleagues, any more questions from your side, or anyone would like to share experience, insight, ideas, reflections? Please, the floor is open. We still have a few minutes. No? Okay. So in my concluding remarks, I would like to indicate that this guidance note is a living document. I mean, it's let's say it's a framework. It's more like it's not a we want to revisit this document, and we want to update it based on your experience on a regular basis. So this is, let's say, the first attempt to compile all the wealth of experience and knowledge that there is on the global level, but also in our specific region. We will support from our side the regional issue-based coalition We will support the rollout of the guidance notes through series of webinars, as I said in the beginning. This is today webinar is the first one, and then we have two more. The second one will be on Tuesday, 6th of February 2018, the same time, 1 p.m. for of Istanbul time, 5 a.m. of Washington time remains. And then we have the this webinar will be focused on the leaving no one behind, inclusion, gender, and sustainable development. So we will look at the importance of including the vulnerable groups and the SDGs implementation, and looking at the good practices that would be supporting that approach. And one more webinar is scheduled for March 6th, same timing, and this will be more looking at the impact of SDGs on addressing gender inequality and child rights throughout the life cycle. So these are two areas. However, if there is any interest or any request to expand the webinars or expand the topics for the next discussion, please feel free to communicate your ideas to me and Fumi, and we will try to integrate them either through the scheduled webinar or organize other webinar as well. We will also try to support you remotely through the technical assistance and through the constant technical assistance through the from the members of the coalition. Okay, on that positive note, I would like to wish you Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, and conclude the webinar for today. Thank you very much for attending it, and I hope you learned a lot, and I hope it was useful to you. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.